All right. Okay. Well, before I go to the guests, I suppose just to say to Desi and Joan, because I know I did notice now that you do mention the issue about the lack of continuous professional development or in-service training programme for special needs assistants, and you also talk about the need for a truly collaborative fashion in relation to looking at the role, and that you're happy to participate in that, and that's very welcome, and that's obviously why you're here. And it would be, when we have the TUI or the INTO, it's just a common criticism that we would have that they tend to put in their presentation. I suppose it's an opportunity for them to put a lot of issues out there that are not necessarily relevant to the meeting. So we wouldn't just be criticising yourselves, we would have a criticism of other unions as well when they come in before the committee. But we do see, obviously, the union as having a role in this. So in terms of the role, and just in terms of elaborating about what you have to say about the training, have you got any feedback from your members, I suppose, in relation to the role? Would you be able to respond? Because a few members there have raised that issue.
Yeah, just to say that, we would see the role development. I believe there's actually probably three and maybe four different types of SNAs, if you understand. One that just totally needs the care needs of the child, with relation to tithing, etc. And some people, under the teacher's instructions, would be a second one where they keep them on course academically. Taking into consideration some of the points made about making sure these are self-sufficient at the end of it, that's the goal. Because the SNAs we represent, that's their goal, is to ensure. That's why you would become an SNA, is because of your vocation towards helping children. So that would be, the second one would be under the instruction. And then there's actually a third one where we believe that SNAs now are being asked to perform invasive procedures, such as catheterisation, without any training whatsoever. I just carried out a survey recently. Now, I have to say, not the formal Survey Monkey one, but by sending out an email and asking people, are you involved? Who gave you the training? Out of all of the responses, the vast majority were trained by the parent to perform catheterisation, an invasive procedure, which could go wrong. You could, my understanding, whilst I'm not a medical practitioner in any way, I understand you could puncture the bladder. And that's severe. Do we wait for that to happen before we provide training? Our SNAs are not saying, by the way, and we're not saying that they wouldn't perform it because it is a care need. However, if you're going to ask people to perform such procedures, or all of the other procedures, then you have to train them, and you have to formally train them. So the development of the role, we will see it as, and they are, the other side of what I want to make a point here is that they're willing. They're so willing. If we provided, and it covers some of the other questions earlier on that was asked earlier on, we provided sensory integration training a number of times last year, and up until this year, actually, in fact. And on a Saturday morning, we could have 150 people in the Red Cow on their own time coming. They are there. They want to be trained. They want to develop. They have, as Senator Morden said earlier on, some of them are so highly qualified. They've come into the job because of their vocation, and now they want to develop. So there is a role there for them to develop. And we could come to I think the most striking word I seen today, or heard today, was actually from yourself, Senator Morden, was striking the balance. Ensuring that the child at the end of the day is looked after. That's what it's about. I would also have to say, just to make the point that I was accused earlier on of making a party political broadcast. I resent that remark on the basis there is no area in my submission that does not represent the views of my members. Everything I said today about the lack of security, fragmentation of posts, lack of training, are all the views of my members. So to say that we're not representing, we're making a party political broadcast on behalf of Impact. Impact is its members. The members give us the views, we feed them back out. That's what I've done today. So if that's your question, that's...
be the next, maybe the department, just in terms of that issue, like, because I mean, you outlined the role. Like, I mean, do you see it changing or what?
Well, in terms of training, and indeed my colleague from the NCC might assist us in this. In terms of training, the department recognises, of course, that there is a challenge there for training. It's a complex issue, and a number of members raised the issue about perhaps potential for in-service and all of that kind of thing. We recognise that certainly the quality of SNA. So I should, before I make this particular point, I should say we entirely agree with our colleagues from Impact that SNAs are, on the whole, very, very willing to engage in training. They're very open to the discussion. We recognise that, and we recognise also, it's been mentioned, that very many SNAs are significantly higher qualified than the minimum requirements that are there. But nonetheless, we recognise that there is a need for ongoing training. It is complex. I mean, for example, when we talk about catheterisation, that's and it is invasive, but it really refers to a very, very small number of children. The department would not obviously support CPD for every SNA in the state in that particular practice. It should only be available for those who are engaging in it. And similarly, for example, Irish Sign Language is a practice for some, a requirement for some SNA positions. And again, it wouldn't be appropriate to train everybody in Irish Sign Language. And that's common characteristic of the SNA scheme. There is a very wide variety, a very varied group of tasks that are undertaken depending on the actual care needs of the child. And clearly, the training that's required needs to be specific to the task that's being undertaken by the SNA rather than general training made available to everybody. Now, part of that can be addressed through the recruitment process. In other words, you hire the right person for the job rather than have a general person. In the event, for example, that you want somebody to do ISL, if you can find somebody who's able to do it and who's willing to come in, then fine. And maybe some ongoing training in that might be required. But the department is conscious of it, is open to it, and we look forward to the recommendations of the report of this committee in that area.
Okay. Teresa, do you want to respond? There's a good few specific questions there from the members.
Yeah, I was just going to, in relation to training, I suppose the NCAC is very clear. We think that where the children have specific needs, the people who are supporting those children should actually receive appropriate training. So, for example, if it's a specific piece of assistive technology, it's important if the SNA is helping the child and supporting the child in the use of that, then the SNA should be trained. So I think we're quite clear in the NCAC in relation to that. In relation to some of the more specific questions that were, and I won't take them in any particular order. Explaining the role of the SNA, again, 20 years on. I get depressed sometimes, that we are still explaining the role of the SNA, but it isn't simply just to parents. I mean, we've just finished a round of consultation in relation to autism, some policy advice that we'll be publishing fairly shortly. And again, it wasn't just parents, it was teachers and principals and school managements. And sometimes you're talking to a teacher and said, oh, actually, I thought they were help to me in the classroom as opposed to help to any specific child. So I don't know what it is, but again, we've tried to have be helpful in our information booklet to parents, and I think actually we've had very positive feedback in relation to our general information for booklet for parents. That's on its third run at this stage, and we're actually going to bring it up to date this year. The SNA scheme, I think, is just a handy flyer for people to take away, because I think it's really important that we're all on board in the same thing. But it is a worry that it is a role that, and I think one of the reasons is because the role is so broad. It isn't a specific, it is particular to the child and the child's needs, and therefore you'll find in one school the SNA is doing one thing, in another school an SNA is doing something else, and in the third school an SNA is doing something else. So it is actually, with respect to the department, and it's very hard to capture that in a circular. So parents, I think, are talking to each other and teachers are talking to each other, and all of a sudden there's a multiplicity of roles. So I think we have to try and be quite clear, and that's quite, it's an easy to read leaflet, and hopefully that will help again in the process. In relation to the issue about any research that teaching assistants are good, or what's happening in other jurisdictions, again, this was an issue the NCSC did look at in the preparation of our 2013 policy advice. It's also an issue that we've looked at in relation to our current advice that we're preparing on autism. And I think it's fair to say that every jurisdiction that we've looked at experiences difficulties in the area of the appropriate supports, as Anya would say, the appropriate supports for children who have special educational needs. And there isn't one model that people would say that is the correct model or that is the perfect model. And it ranges from some jurisdictions that have absolutely no SNAs to some jurisdictions that children who have quite profound special education needs have no teachers. So you've everything in between. So it is quite difficult. So then when you're looking at the research is quite difficult, you know, to interpret in that way. What we're looking at when we're looking at trying, I suppose, to objectively consider what are the right supports for children with special education needs, we have a look at the research. And the concern is in a couple of one longitudinal research that was published, I think, a couple of years ago on the UK, and it was done over quite a wide. It was quite clear that, yeah, I mean, teacher assistants are, in the general, not just for children with special education needs. You could make a case for them, or you could make a case for more teaching, or whatever. But in general, the evidence is that where you have, the longer that a child remains with a teaching assistant, the poorer the academic outcomes. You know, and I think that is quite a strong piece of evidence. The other evidence, I think, which is quite widely regarded, is that it is the impact of the teacher, the quality of the teacher, the quality of the teaching. So it isn't, I think, to take Senator Moran's point in relation to the teacher and people who are newly qualified and so on and so forth, and looking at the role of the teacher, I think that is an issue. But it is the professional teacher and the quality of their teaching and how they understand that a child, that particular child learns. That's what's important in terms of delivering better outcomes, which I think is what all of us, you know, would like to drive. In relation to, if it's all right with the committee, I'll leave the questions in relation to the current allocation process to the department, who I think are happy to deal with those. Deputy O'Brien raised an issue in relation to a number of issues about the 3,000 who refused applications and how many appealed, and the Ombudsman, he isn't here at the moment, but in relation to that, I haven't got the figures in front of me, but from memory, I think a couple of years ago we had, out of 24,000 applications in totality for resource teaching and SNA support, I think we had 150 appeals, and of those, the majority were for SNAs, and I think a few, maybe 3 or 4, received SNAs as a result of the appeal. And last year, I think, again from memory, I think it was less than 100 or 100 formal appeals on the process. And I'm not aware of the numbers which went to the Ombudsman. In relation to the IEPs and the SNAs not at the IEP meeting, again, while this wouldn't formally be a matter for the NCAC, I think we would maintain quite strongly that whoever is in a position to assist in the development of a child and in the development of the IEP, they should be at in IEP meetings. In relation to transitions, I think some work, we looked at this quite closely. We're doing some work at the moment in relation to transitions, in relation to providing advice to schools on transitioning from preschool to primary, to post-primary, and either into special school or from special school and out and onto special classes. And we're hoping to have that work completed this year. But actually, broadly, when we were talking to people, we were talking to parents and to teachers and to school management bodies and to advocacy groups, by and large, a lot of work actually has been done, with particularly reference to, from primary to post-primary. There's a lot of work actually now that's now been put in place, to the extent that I know one of the schools was telling us about how they actually filmed the entire school on their iPad. They filmed where the child who was coming into post-primary would actually go, where that child would sit, who their teachers were, and then they were able, the parent and the child were able to download that and watch that and rehearse that over the summer, so that child had an opportunity to, I suppose, have that reinforced over the summer break. So that was quite a lot of positive work in relation to transitions. Primary, absolutely. I think special education and inclusion in primary is very well embedded. I think post-primary, it certainly is. I think there's a lot of really good work being done, but in some schools, certainly more I think is required. And I think that was it. I'm quite happy if I've missed something, if people want to bring it to my attention. Is it okay?
Okay. Let's see. Anya, sorry, I was trying to think of Anya. Anya, there's a few issues there.
Okay, yeah. So training, well, that was part of our submission, that we felt that training was important. And I think certainly we feel that there should be a basic training for all SNAs, not just specifically around the particular role that they have in schools. And we would have identified that the kind of things that should be involved in that is understanding children's needs, communication skills and basic child protection, that all SNAs in their role should have that as a basic requirement before they take up their role. There's been a lot said about, I think, physical care needs of children and extended training for those particular things. But also, as we'd said in our submission, I think the SNA is increasingly being assigned to children who have very complex behavioural needs as well. And when you look at the recent 2014 circular, part of their role covers preserving the safety of the pupil and others with whom the pupil is in contact, and assisting to ensure the prevention of self-injurious or destructive behaviour. They're really significant roles, and the circular is saying that they are the responsibility and the role of the SNA. And certainly we would argue that anybody who is in that position of that being part of their role within the classroom should have some very significant training to carry out that role. Anybody who's trying to carry out that role without the significant training that's required, one, may not be able to do it, and children could, or staff could, become harmed. But two, you've also got the possibility of, because you're not aware of what you're doing, making a situation worse by not having the right skills to intervene effectively or early enough in the behavioural issues. So I think specifically we need to not only concentrate on the physical requirements in terms of additional training, but also the behavioural requirements of SNAs. In terms of why we're still not clear, and particularly why parents still aren't clear of the role, whilst agreeing with Teresa's what she's identified, I think also the role's not clear because of the challenges that schools have to deal with in terms of supporting children with special education needs. So if you're a principal in a school, your two options of allocations for support for children is either the resource teacher or the SNA. The resource teacher, in terms of getting allocation for resource hours, is much more clearly defined and through assessment of how many hours you can get for children. The SNA is the most flexible role within the school in terms of trying to get additional resources to support children. And I think that as long as that continues to be the case, and that we don't, and it goes back to the point that you identified that I said earlier, parents fight for any resource rather than the right resource, and quite often the right resource for children in schools that their need to access the curriculum aren't available for the principal or the teacher to allocate. So it might be speech and language therapy, it might be occupational therapy, it might be behavioural therapy, and they're not at the disposal of the school. So where there's this vacuum of resources that are the right resources, I think the most flexible resource is always fought for, and that comes down to the SNA. So I'm not sure whether there's actually people don't understand it. Maybe there are cases, but I think it's the fact that people are desperate for a resource, and they would rather have the not right, quite fit resource rather than no resource at all. And the SNA has started to fit that gap, I think, would be what we would be hearing from parents. So that's the bit on that. Transition from primary to secondary, again, I think Teresa's right in the work that's being done, but also I think it'll be interesting to see over the next few years how the new education passport that's going with children from primary to secondary, there's a section on that that's specifically around special educational needs. There's also a section on it where the child gives their own feedback on individual issues for them, and also the parent has an opportunity to give feedback. And I think that has the potential to really give the new school a really good rounded picture of the child that's coming. And if those reports go in good time, which they're supposed to do, I think that can give the post-primary school really good information to follow up on with families that are needing additional resources. And then I think, the peer support, which a number of people asked. I think the peer support is already happening. I think children, by their very nature, support their peers. So I think that informal peer support is really important, and I think children will naturally provide that. But I think there's also an opportunity to formalise that in some ways. So kind of mentors and buddy systems within schools. There's clearly roles that other children within the school shouldn't be doing in terms of care needs and toileting and all of the other things. But I think there's a huge amount that naturally children will support other children in. And I think if children are supported to do that, I think that has benefits that far outreach the two individual children. I think it's creating, active citizenship. It supports the children in the school, but also supports society because of the type of society that breeds and the modelling that happens in schools. So I think actually peer support is not just about the individual children, but generally the kind of the schools that we would create by having that kind of support within the school system. So it's not that it would fit all of the care needs, but I think we just need to see other children as more of the solution with children that have got additional needs as well. I think they're the 4 bits that were directed to me.
Sorry, Deputy McConnell, did you ask, were you wanted Impact to say what they wanted to do in terms of the expansion of the role, was it?
If anything, yes.
Yeah, because I didn't. Deputy McConnell asked you, how did you think the role should be expanded?
Well, as I said, I do believe the training to give them certain skills. The teaching assistants, maybe there's something slightly less than that, but to ensure that if recognising the needs of the child, on directions of the teacher, to be able to provide some, and they do. The fact of the matter is, I know it's very, very easy for people here to see the SNA as, because it's on the paper, as a care need. But in fact, in the school, it's completely different. Many of the SNAs actually carry out a lot of these functions. And I think, what I would be saying is that let's regularise it. Let's get the balance right.
Like what functions does he?
They're keeping them on, keeping them on task would be. I mean, Joan was an SNA for 17 years. And she would tell you that, her joy of our joy, and she'd tell you herself, in actual fact, our joy of seeing her child progressing into college and further because of the help she and other SNAs gave.
John, did you want to respond to any of the issues?
Well, I suppose it's not a party political statement, but I would just like to put on the record that Impact are recognised as great champions for supporting the needs of children, and we've built our branches and our membership and indeed our new education division mostly on our commitment to children. And I just would like to put that on the record because, there was a certain amount of criticism aimed at our submission. Special needs assistants are well placed to provide a holistic support within the classroom and in mainstream. The special needs assistant is critical to ensuring the peer group acceptance and total inclusion, because children with difficulties don't naturally integrate with other children easily, and it's only with some sort of adult assistance, supervision or encouragement or training that will happen. They won't gravitate towards each other, and I know that from experience in school, that children that are different or that have difficulties, and even children, in particular children who don't have allocated support, they'll be isolated and they'll be left out and they'll be excluded because they're not good at sports, and the rest of the children like to play football or play sports at break time. So children with difficulties or children that are different tend to be isolated unless there's an SNA there who will encourage the other children to play, and I know that I did that very actively myself. The role is 17 years or 18 years now in mainstream. It was introduced in 1997 by Micheál Martin, I believe, and it, at the time I don't think anybody anticipated how much parents with children that had children with difficulties wanted their children to be educated in the mainstream setting and be fully interactive with children, with the peers that they would be playing with in their own communities at home, and that they wouldn't be segregated into special schools, because until that time, if a child had any kind of a difficulty or was different in any way at all, they were sent to special schools. And so since 1997 we have made tremendous progress, and I think, like everybody here would acknowledge, that the success has been mainly down to the passion and commitment that special needs assistants have for supporting the children, and all of the training that they have to date they've undertaken on their own time at their own expense. And there are fantastic schools out there and principals that work very closely with us, and Desi and I and my 3 colleagues that represent special needs assistants in schools find that when we go into a school to work out an issue, we tend to build relationships, great relationships, with most of the principals that we're dealing with, because usually it's down to a misunderstanding about the role of the special needs assistant. And once there's clarification on that, and it's identified that the SNA isn't a whole school resource or an assistant to everybody that needs a bit of photocopying or laminating, and that they're there for a specific purpose, because special needs assistants are recruited specifically to assist the school to provide for children with assessed additional care needs. And not every children that has needs and would need support is lucky enough to get support. So in those cases, and best practice is that the SNA will provide access to the children that need it, even though they haven't been allocated it, and that there is general goodwill throughout the school, and everybody is on the same playing field, and everybody's on the same team. Best practice and practice from day one. In 1997 I was one of the SNAs who was fortunate enough to get one of those 100 positions, and from day one I was involved in preparing the care plans for children with, even before IEPs were formalised. I was always treated as part of the team, and it was always best practice. We had multidisciplinary teams, we had people from Enable Ireland coming in, OTs and physios, and the teacher and I would work with the OT and physio and continue to integrate those sessions into PE or whatever, and whether it was to make sure that the child was sitting properly or needed a footstool to keep their posture right, or whatever it was, we had a great awareness. And as far as the teaching assistant is concerned, I'm aware of the system in England where you have a teaching assistant, and you're right, Teresa, it is that it's for the whole school and it's not specifically for children with special needs. And the difference in the role of the teaching assistant is that they can take over the class when a teacher has a course day, and the children aren't divided up the way they are here. And as far as children with special needs are concerned, they have little or nothing at all to do with children with special needs. There are special needs assistants in England that are assigned to children with special needs. There are 3 grades. There's a classroom assistant, special needs assistant and teaching assistant, and they all have different roles and responsibilities. It's not fair or true to say that the SNA has no role to play in terms of supporting the children, the education or teaching of a child with special educational needs. It is imperative that children with special educational needs are taught by a qualified class teacher. That's a given. Every child has a right to be taught by a qualified class teacher, and we would be very much advocating that wherever. But we do, in reality, the SNA must, when necessary or appropriate, under the direction of the teacher, support that academic work and keep the child on task, and let the teacher know if the child is having difficulty, so that the teacher can spend some more time maybe on the lesson or whatever, or even take the rest of the children and just keep an eye on them while they're assigned a task while the teacher is on the one-to-one. And I just would like to conclude by reiterating again that we are very grateful to Senator Moran for taking this to this level and to bring about the report, and that we're grateful to be invited here today and to give the view of our members. It is a role that I'm very passionate about, because I still consider myself to be an SNA, even though I work with Impact. I work very closely with the schools and with the special needs assistants and the non-teaching staff in schools. And I would like to say again that Impact are extremely committed to advocating and campaigning for the support of children with special needs, and and advocating for every child that needs support to get support.
Okay, thanks very much, Joan. I know that before I go back, Jim, there was a question about, I think it was from Deputy McConaughey, about just the number of applications for SNAs and the delays in informing the schools with their numbers. Do you have any?
There are a number of questions, Chair, so I'll address that one first, and then if you like, I'll start addressing the other questions that still remain outstanding.
Okay, and, well, maybe before you do that, if you could just do that,
I'll do that one first.
and then I'll take more questions, and then you can. I'll come back to you straight away.
Okay, fine. So the numbers of SNAs have increased, I suppose, each year for the last number of years, essentially since the scheme was introduced, by and large. Last year we announced the numbers to be allocated on the 25th of June. This year we have not yet been in a position to make the announcement, and indeed I, on behalf of the department, very much regret that this hasn't been possible so far. The NCC has already provided us with details of the numbers of SNAs that are required to meet demand from the beginning of the next school year. And I can inform the committee that the demand has increased this year. So the department has informed. We've had a long engagement over the last while with the NCSE to do the diligence bit on those numbers to make sure that it's all appropriate. The department has informed the Minister of the issue, and the Minister is currently considering the matter with her government colleagues. Until that process has concluded, I am constrained from disclosing the numbers that are involved, but I can give you a commitment, Chairperson, that I will immediately inform the committee when I'm in a position to do so.
Okay. All right. I know Senator Darcy had a supplement.
Yeah, first of all, could I say I welcome the Joan's elaboration on the impacts position in relation to SNAs and the vision for SNAs. And I did ask a question about proper respect and value and general dog's body. These terms, what did they refer to? School principals? Or, but having said that, I think this debate has been very, very useful. And I will say about Desi that I definitely go line hunting with him. I'd have no fear that if you were at my back that I'd be safe. And I know your first duty is to look after your members. The role of the SNA is that, and it has been for a long time, an SNA is appointed to assigned to the school consequent on the needs of the pupil, and within that construct, an SNA can perform many valuable duties, and one of them would be within the classroom non-teaching duties, which would actually free the teacher and give the teacher more time. Isn't that right? To work with the pupil with special needs, and that's one of the most crucial parts of the whole thing, linking into the IEP and everything else. And I have, like, there are. It's a difficult situation, just the same as when a child is taken out of the classroom for learning support or resource teaching. You have to, as a whole school and as a teacher and as a staff and a whole staff approach, figure out what is the loss as well as the gain to the pupil of that withdrawal. And it's a very complex situation. And I visited many schools this year, including autism units, mainstream schools, and as I'm sure you all have, and I've seen how the role of the SNA has developed, and the absolute valuable work that's been done by SNAs. So we can develop on that. But the one thing I would say is I would not like to see limits being applied to the role. Flexibilities, I think, are important as well.
Deputy Daly.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate your latitude and time is coming against us, so I'll be as brief as I can. It's something that troubles me as well, that I just didn't get to mention earlier during my contribution, is the whole issue at second level and the social aspect of the SNA attached to a young adult effectively, and how that is working out, and the experience of it's a concern for parents all the time when they're putting their 13-year-old or 14-year-old into secondary school and putting an adult sitting alongside them as an SNA or whatever. It's a difficulty, so I just would like if Teresa, maybe the department, and indeed Anya and Impact, if any of them have any views on it, on that particular, because it's an emerging challenge. And thank you for the clarification regarding the 17 years or 18 years, Joan. But as we know, it started out in primary school primarily, and it's really secondary school is a very late comer to the party of this, so we don't have that much experience of it. So I'd just be interested in the stakeholders' experience and of that, and their suggestions for dealing with it, and maybe giving assurances to parents and how it's being dealt with. Somebody mentioned preschool. I know it's isolated, but down in our area in West Cork, children with special learning needs attending preschool can get SNAs through the good offices of Coaction, and who are the body who are tasked there. And I appreciate, I don't think too many areas of the country have that rolled out at this level, but it is certainly in our own area. And the other thing, and again thanks to Joan, and you brought a lot of passion and understanding, and clearly your experience as an SNA in the system came to the fore there, and I share your understanding, your belief in your day, and indeed in my day when I was practising in the classroom as both a principal and a teacher. It was a given that the SNA attended the preparation of the IEPs, no questions asked. In fact, the SNA was seen as one of the strongest contributors there, because while they weren't an educationalist, they were the link, as somebody said earlier. I think Anya put it very well about they being the link and the fill-in. So I would just ask, would the department consider, and it has been the subject, as I referred earlier to PQ, I had recently to the Minister, would the department consider, and I'd appreciate if Mr Mulcairns might come back to me or to the committee on this, that if you would consider maybe reissuing some sort of clarification, because as I understand it, as a representative on the ground, that there is an issue with that a lot of SNAs don't attend the preparation of IEPs, and I'd be quite concerned if that's the standard practice. And I have reasonable grounds to suggest that it's more widespread than we might understand here. So if the department would consider maybe just reissuing a directive or some clarification on that to schools, and maybe you just confirm back to us if you think that's appropriate, and if indeed you're willing to do the same in due course. That doesn't have been on today. Thank you. I appreciate it.